Namaste, Salam Alaikum, and good afternoon from Secretariat Office of Global South Coalition for Dignified Menstruation. I'm Radha Paudel, author, activist, founder, and CEO of Global South Coalition for Dignified Menstruation. It is survivor-led, worldwide network officially founded in 2019 for changing the narratives around menstruation from hygiene to dignity and from 5 days bleeding to life cycle approach. The Global South Coalition for Dignified Menstruation has been working almost in zero funding, though carrying out various activities in different capacity like trainings, workshops, publications, research, webinars, etc. It also initiated International Dignified Menstruation Day since 29 for 8th December. Upcoming 8th December will be 7th International Dignified Menstruation Day. Global South Coalition will host 3 days International Learning Conference here in Kathmandu, Nepal. I take this opportunity to invite you all to join this conference. The details of the conference is available in website. Please visit our website www.dignifiedmenstruation.org. Moving forward, let me quickly share about the logistics. Please mute yourself. Please turn off your video if you are driving or working. Please introduce yourself in chat box. Mention your name, country, organization, and contact details if you like to share with us. Please drop your comments or questions in chat box. If you are watching through the Facebook Live of Global South Coalition for Dignified Menstruation, please drop your concerns or questions in comment section. Today, we have Dr. Sally, who is one of my best friends for Dignified Menstruation, and she's medical sociologist, specialty in menstrual health and associate human rights issues. She's founder of website called Menstrual Matters. You just Google it. You can find very evidence-based information over there. Research findings. She will explain later about it. Today we will discuss about her first academic book, Menstrual Myth Busting, the case of the hormonal female. Let's welcome to her, and it will be very exciting. Please share your comments, question in chat box. Sally, please, floor is yours.
Hi. So I'm just going to start with some slides and then we're going to have more of a conversation and I'll answer any questions that you have. If you put them in the chat box, we'll come to as many as we can after these slides. So I'm just going to share my slideshow. So I hope you can see this page. Yeah, great. It's not changing page. Yeah. So we're just going to go over. So this is my new book. It's very exciting. It's taken many, many years of research to get to this point of publishing a book. It's an academic book. So normally this would be people working in universities, maybe doctors and clinicians, but I have tried to write it as clearly and as accessibly as possible. So also for menstrual health campaigners. So the main things that it covers are menstrual health physiology, what's happening in our bodies, because we're not actually taught enough about this. And what we are taught is one particular version of the truth, which is quite a patriarchal or a what's called a pronatalist, the idea that because people have female bodies that they should be having babies. That's the strong bias that has been affecting our education on menstrual health for forever, really, but at least for many decades. So we're going to start off by talking about what you might not know about the menstruating bodies, maybe what we have been taught or something about what we've been taught and why that's perhaps been affected by social biases. And then why is it that we're in this situation? And then I'm going to go into the book a little bit, just a summary of what else is in this book and the main findings of my research, which is the research this book is all about, which relates to a condition called PMS, premenstrual syndrome. But quite often, most people use that term to describe normal, common cyclic changes that most of us experience, and also more severe symptoms of underlying health conditions that can happen every cycle or might be worsened or triggered by the menstrual cycle. Okay, let's get started. So this is the first kind of myth, or certainly something that we're not typically taught at school, and perhaps not even at medical school if you go on to become a nurse or a doctor. So why is it that humans menstruate? Now, it's a very rare thing because 98% of mammals, so the other kinds of creatures that we are part of as humans, they don't menstruate. So for instance, dogs don't menstruate. They do have blood sometimes, but that's when they're ovulating, it's when they're fertile, and the blood comes from the vagina, not the womb, and it's designed so that the male dogs know when the female dogs are fertile. That's absolutely not the same thing as menstruation. And in fact, menstruation only happens to humans, to other primates, so that's chimps, bonobos, orangutans, gorillas, although they have far less blood than we do, they don't lose as much blood. And then some other species, so there's some bats that fly around, there's some other monkeys, there's the elephant shrew, which is a small creature, but it's related to elephants, not rodents. And then most recently, there is a little mouse called the spiny mouse that has been found to have a very short menstrual cycle of 9 to 10 days each cycle. But this, in general, most mammals do not menstruate. No cows, no horses, no dogs. Anyway, I've given you just to think through in your minds. If you had to answer this question right now, if a teacher or a doctor was asking you this, why do you think that we bleed on a cyclical basis? And I've given some options. The first one here, is it because we need to clean out our wombs? Is it a sort of cleaning process? Or maybe it's a type of natural abortion, when everything is lost from the womb, including anything inside. Do our periods somehow help prepare the womb for a pregnancy? Or D, do our periods protect us from dangers, maybe even death? Or E, is the blood loss, on a regular basis, is it a sign of our fertility? And then I always give people another couple of options, which is F, is it two of those ones? If you choose that one, I want you to think which two. Don't just choose that answer. Or G, is it all of those things? So just take a minute and don't worry, this is the kind of thing that we're not taught at school. So this is the sort of thing that we're left to just reach our own conclusions, or maybe to interpret the things we read about female bodies to guess why we might be having periods. Okay, so we're going to go to the answers now, and it might be a bit surprising. So the answer is, it's two of these answers, so really it's answer F, but the two answers that are true, that are fact-based, is B and D. And this is quite a shock to people. The most common answers I hear are either A or C, so it's either cleaning the womb in some way, or it's preparing for pregnancy, and sometimes E, it's a sign of our fertility. So not only are we not taught this, but what we're left to imagine or left to believe is quite often the opposite to the truth about why we've evolved to have these periods. And interestingly, there are lots of gender myths. So usually myths, stories we tell ourselves about the female body tied up to these myths. So the first one, the idea that the womb needs cleaning. There's nothing dirty about the womb. The womb is an organ inside our body. It's not exposed to dust or dirt or anything like that. And unless you have some sort of infection in the womb, there's nothing bad in there at all. There's no need to cleanse our inner bodies. They're fine as they are. The idea that it helps prepare for pregnancy, if you think about it, if you are pregnant, having a period's not usually a good thing. If you see blood when you're pregnant, this is usually maybe a sign that something's going wrong or there's some sort of issue you might need to see a doctor about. But this is quite often what we're taught to believe because we're told the whole menstrual cycle, so the ovulation part, which is all about pregnancy, but also that the period part is somehow also for pregnancy, but it isn't. We'll talk about why not in a minute. And then to signal our fertility, this is kind of half true, but half not true. So by the time you're bleeding on any cycle, it's too late to get pregnant. You've already ovulated, the egg has started moving towards the womb, and then everything inside the womb is leaving the body in the period. So actually, although it is sometimes possible still to get pregnant while you're bleeding, it's usually not a good sign of whether you've ovulated or not. You get your period when you do ovulate, you also get a period when you haven't ovulated that cycle. So it's not really a direct symbol of whether you're fertile or not. And of course, many people, about 10% of us, are not fertile, even if we do have regular periods and it looks to everybody else and to ourselves as if we should be fertile. Fertility and periods are not directly the same thing. So as I said before, really very few mammals, the big family that we belong to, menstruate. They don't have periods. In fact, with 98% of them not, you would say this isn't a thing that mammals typically do. Of the little species, including humans, that do have periods, we share this feature. Now, it's a very difficult word in English, but I'll explain what it means. So, spontaneous decidualization. Now, the first part is easy. Spontaneous is a word for automatic. It just means this happens whether you've ovulated or not, whether you've ever had sex or not. This is the thing that just happens automatically. And it's important because in those 98% of mammals that don't have periods, they only go through this process when there is an embryo in the womb and it signals to the womb lining to do this thing called decidualization. Again, it's a very long, complicated word from the Latin. What it refers to is the thickening of the womb lining. So we've got an automatic thickening of the womb lining. And this happens to us on a cyclic basis. So just after ovulation, our womb lining starts to thicken automatically. This is very unique. This is what all the menstruating mammals have in common. And it's very different to most of the other mammals, where that thickening only happens when they're pregnant, when there's an embryo inside the womb, and that causes the womb lining to thicken. So the difference for us is that whether we've ovulated or not, whether we've ever had sex or not, whether there's any chance of us trying to get pregnant, for instance, when we're children, that we don't want to be pregnant, our wombs will automatically be going through this process ahead of any potential embryo getting to the womb. So the theory is, why would we do this? Why would our wombs be going through this quite, it's called costly in biological terms, because it uses a lot of energy. We've got to put a lot of blood go to the womb and we have to use energy to create all these new cells and to thicken this lining of the womb. And then the period itself, as you know, if you have a period, it's costly. It uses our energy, it makes us tired. We're losing blood, which is not very good for any mammal, but for humans, we're losing iron, other nutrients, and water and things when we're bleeding. So they think that what has happened is we've evolved this automatic period process to protect us from any potentially dangerous or unviable things. So another thing you might not have been taught at school, but you might be aware of from reading the news or things happening around you, is that actually being pregnant and having a baby can be very dangerous for us. There are lots of health conditions you can get in pregnancy, and then in the birth itself, there's a thing called maternal mortality, which refers to the number of women that die during or just after childbirth, because not just of difficulties with the birth, but losing too much blood, dying from infections, dying from diseases associated like high blood pressure and things. It's quite a dangerous time for us being pregnant and then giving childbirth. So the idea is that even though periods are costly, they make us tired, we lose iron, they can be painful, they're potentially life-saving. Because what we think they're doing is that womb lining is thickening, and then somehow we're not sure how yet. It can tell if there's a pregnancy or not, and if there is an embryo, whether it's likely to be a good one, whether it's likely to be a safe one. And then if not, so obviously most cycles we're not pregnant. So if there's no pregnancy at all, or if there is one but it's unlikely to be successful, we lose everything from the womb. So the womb lining comes away and we keep bleeding to remove everything, including any eggs, any fertilized eggs or unfertilized eggs. They also are removed in the period. So you probably haven't been taught that, but this is a fact. The fact is that we're losing everything in a period, that it's performing a kind of safety check for any dangerous pregnancies. That's a theory, but the fact that it's an abortive function, that's a fact, because that's just describing what happens during a period. And this fits the data that we have for humans getting pregnant and having babies very well. So compared to other mammals, to get pregnant is harder for us. Not for everyone, obviously, some people get pregnant immediately, but compared to other mammals, it's something that may take us several attempts when we're trying to get pregnant. We have a high number of embryos that aren't going to survive very long. So in fact, we have a lot of what's called miscarriages or early abortions in the first few weeks or even hours of a conception, that you don't even know that you're pregnant sometimes, because we have these high rates of very unviable embryos created. We have high miscarriage rates. So particularly in the UK, even if you're trying to get pregnant and you're really happy about it, they tell you not to tell anyone else, like your parents or other people, until at least 12 weeks. And this is because there's such a high number of people that will lose that pregnancy in the first 12 weeks. It's to have a more realistic idea about whether this pregnancy is going to hopefully continue or not. And then we have, compared to other mammals that don't have periods, our placenta, which is the part which joins from the embryo to the lining of the womb, it's very invasive, which means it goes really thick into that tissue, and it's doing that to take as many nutrients as it can for the embryo from the mother. So it's getting all our iron, all the energy, everything it can from us, which is good. That's what a baby needs in order to develop, but it's not necessarily good if that's too much, taking too much from the parent. That can lead to health issues or even death, from anemia and then heavy bleeding during the childbirth. So these theories are quite well established, particularly in infertility research, but they're still not taught to us at school, which I think is a big, it's a big problem. We should understand why our bodies are going through this, particularly because when they're painful, it's nice to know that at least they're doing this to try and protect us instead of just being painful and maybe negative. The other thing that we're not taught at school is what else is happening in our bodies. So in the UK, we're taught this kind of hormonal diagram. That's what all the attention is on, that we go up and then we ovulate and then it goes down and then maybe our womb lining starts thickening and then we have the period. And in the meantime, these hormones are going up and down. We're often not taught about the thing I just talked to you about, this automatic thickening of the womb lining, which should be called spontaneous decidualization. That's completely missing from most people's education. And that's crazy because that's the reason why we have periods. So not talking about it is very weird. We're also not talking about how physical and inflammatory these events are. So when you ovulate and a follicle comes out of an ovary, it has to burst through the wall of the ovary. Sometimes people can feel that. You might get a sharp pang of pain around ovulation. But also, this needs a lot of energy, and so blood flow increases to the ovaries at that time. And then when the womb lining starts thickening and creating this new tissue, that's also highly inflammatory. So a lot of blood has to go there. Our body temperature goes up. And then during the period, obviously, we can have pain as the womb is that is made of muscle. It looks like this, it's made of muscle. And it contracts probably to try and get rid of that womb lining and help it to leave the body, to make sure everything goes from inside the womb lining. But if we're not taught that these are inflammation, then all of those cyclical changes we experience, like a temperature increase or pain or water retention, when your breasts can become bigger, maybe a bit painful, even water retention in our faces or in your hands or in your feet, wherever you feel it, changes even in your mood, they seem mysterious, or they might seem hormonal, which is typically how in the UK people say, "Oh, I'm feeling hormonal," but they actually mean these physical signs of inflammation that are actually normal. These are because of what's happening in our body, we have these inflammatory changes. And we're definitely not taught that our body is both for conception, for conceiving babies and having babies. That's the ovulation side of the cycle. But it's also contraception, that the middle bit, the decidualization, is both for helping a healthy pregnancy. If it thinks it's a good one, it will really support it. But if it thinks it's a bad one, it will get rid of that. And that's what the period is doing. It's removing anything from the womb. And this is very political. If you're only taught that your body is for having babies, this is very much in line with lots of religious, cultural, social, political ideals that sort of suggest to women in particular that you should have babies and that this is your true role, your biological role almost in society, rather than it being an option or perhaps even impossible. Infertility is very normal. Again, 10% of us, male and female, are infertile, and this has always been the case. But instead, most of us live in societies where you're supposed to, as a woman anyway, be a mother, and that this is supposed to be your role. And often it's unpaid, whereas other choices and other activities you could do with your time are paid. So there's lots of politics behind why we're taught less than half of what we should be taught about our menstrual cycles. And then we come on to what you might have been taught. This varies from country to country. So this is based in the UK, but this is often in a lot of textbooks that go overseas as well. As I say, it's these diagrams of hormones. You're typically only taught about ovulation and maybe menstruation, and you're taught about the hormonal triggering of these events, which is really all the hormones are doing. They're coordinating these different physical events as they happen. You're implicitly taught that our bodies are just for conception. There's no mention of the contraception action of periods. We're often not taught an almost exactly the same hormonal coordination of how sperm are produced. So if you were to put them on next to each other on a textbook and you had how sperm are produced here, how eggs are produced on the other side, it's the same hormone. So we have luteinizing hormone, follicle stimulating hormone in men, we have the same thing in women, and then there is testosterone rather than estrogen in the male body, but it's almost exactly the same. It's just that we have a monthly cycle and sperm is continuous. So their hormones are doing this all day long, throughout the day in different times of day, whereas we have this more of a not always monthly, but between 21 days to 35-day cycles. That's the only difference. But if you're not taught about sperm and the male body, what's happened is the idea that women, females, are hormonal, and that maybe our moods go up and down, maybe our behaviors change throughout the month, whereas men are stable, constant, rational. These are all beliefs, they're not true, because allegedly we are hormonal and men are not. So that's not true at all. As soon as you start researching hormones, you see that all humans, all mammals, are hormonal any split second of the time. Our whole body, our reactions to things, even thinking, our immune system, when we eat things, everything is coordinated by the hormones. But because you only taught one side of the conversation, you start thinking that men and women and male and female humans are completely different things. That one of us has this hormonal way of being, this over emotional, the fact that the idea that we're controlled by our bodies, by our reproductive bodies, our decision making, the way that we are, everything. And then this other category of human, men, are supposedly not. They're sort of much more in control. Now, none of this is true. This is a very strong gender myth. And it's reinforced by what we're taught and not taught at school. How have we sort of come to this? So I've presented this before with this network. I did a study a couple of years ago looking at school textbooks, but also all the textbooks used to train medical professionals. This is in the UK, but a lot of these books are globally famous and they're used to teach doctors all. And you can see that all of them show that hormonal coordination with the menstrual cycle. But when you get to C, column C, none of them talk about the abortifacient, the purpose of having periods. None of them mention that at all. So you're getting, again, a very biased position on what the menstrual cycle is about. They're just talking about ovulation, really. They're not, even though they might mention periods, they're not describing what's happening to us, what they feel like. There was very little mention about pain, hardly anything on blood loss even, nothing about swelling, water retention, the temperature increase, virtually nothing on the fact that eventually we start to become anemic. It's very common for women of reproductive age to be anemic or to be very low on iron. And this has a lot of health issues, lots of problems associated with it. And nothing much on menstrual health conditions either. It's almost as if they don't want us to know about the realities of having a menstrual cycle. Again, why is it that we're not taught this and not taught that? There isn't a scientific reason. So it isn't that we don't know. I know this because I've read the right books, but particularly people working in fertility, they know this really well. So why isn't it being taught to students? Why isn't it being taught to the public? Why isn't it being taught even to our doctors when we go and see them with our menstrual health conditions? And again, there's no scientific reason. So it means there must be a kind of political reason, usually, or a social reason. And I think the main one is what's called pronatalism. And again, as I said, it's the idea that the female reproductive body, and therefore all women, we're sort of categorized as the same thing. We're for having children and for caring for children. And therefore, that's what we should do at motherhood. And of course, in capitalist world, that we should do this for free, that this is just nature. It's unfortunate. It's not just. It's not equitable. It's just the way you're built. It fulfills that narrative very well. Whereas getting information about what periods really are for and taking our health seriously, it might make some people choose not to become mothers, and society can't have that. So this isn't any group of men sitting in charge of the world. This is a lot of men and women in society who don't want us to know everything about our bodies because it challenges what they believe should be happening. There's another myth, particularly in the UK and in North America, the idea that women And again, this is interesting that it's not just to biological women. So this also applies to trans women who are born male, but they identify as men, that we're crazy, that we're hormonal in the sense that we go up and down, we have no control over our emotions, and that there's this direct link between our reproductive bodies, or in the case of trans women, just our gender, that makes us less trustworthy, or maybe we're exaggerating things, imagining things, and we should certainly not be in leadership positions. Again, this is just fulfilling gender inequalities, the way that society kind of wants us to stay. But it's definitely a real myth. In the UK today, people really do have these beliefs about women. So finally, we come to the book. So what I've just gone through there, the idea of what we're taught and what we're not taught as being a political thing, not a scientific thing, I cover in the first chapter of the book. And some of those things that we really should be taught as children about what to understand about our bodies. Then the second chapter is all about how did we get here? So looking at the history of both what's taught in medicine and what medical people have thought about periods, and particularly about cyclical symptoms, cyclical changes that we experience throughout history, but also a little summary of how feminist researchers have tried to challenge some of these things that have been said in medicine. And that's been going on for a long time as well, at least since the 1960s onwards. So the first part of the book is sort of how do we get to today? Then the second part of the book is using the example of PMS. This is the premenstrual syndrome, a word that is applied to all those natural and sort of healthy physiological changes that most of us go through, but also sometimes the triggering or worsening of more severe symptoms, which are typically the sign of an underlying health condition. And the question, this is the research I did to do my PhD at King's College London. It's loosely called What Counts as a Premenstrual Symptom? Because I wanted to know how were people differentiating healthy physiology from underlying conditions, and which symptoms were people most concerned with? Were it emotional changes, because that's in line with the hysterical, crazy female idea, or was it pain? Because we know that quite often our pain, particularly in our body, in our reproductive bodies, is made smaller or ignored, dismissed, or you're just told it's normal, even when maybe you have endometriosis or you have a fibroid or there's something that's actually wrong with you that needs treating. And then the 4 chapters of the book go through the main themes that I found. So basically what I did was I interviewed around half of the world's experts on PMS, which sounds amazing, but it was about 16 people, because there's very few people working on this globally, at least publishing regularly and getting published in medical journals, that kind of thing. So the people who really control the discourses we have on PMS. And I interviewed both the feminist people who are their whole careers about challenging certain medical discourses about the menstrual cycle, and those medical researchers too. So I interviewed half of all of those. And I also interviewed some people who identified as experiencing PMS. That's all they had to do. And I spoke to as many varied people from different religious backgrounds, different ages, different ethnicities. Some of them were rich, some of them were poorer. I just spoke to a wide variety of people about their experiences. And then I compared what everybody said, how they described PMS, why they thought we had it, what does it look like, what does it feel like, with the available evidence base that we have. So there is actually a lot of research about what types of change people generally experience, how severe or not it is, underlying conditions. So I just wanted to check whether what these experts were saying, whether what the patients were saying was in line with what we found out with very large scale population studies. And the idea was that if there was a difference, because particularly the scientists, what they say should absolutely represent what we know scientifically. So if there's a difference, then it must mean that there are these social norms, gender norms, pronatalist, you name it, must be affecting their work. So I don't need to go into this in too much detail, but this is a kind of diagram showing my findings. So in the middle are the 4 themes that came out, the 4 main discourses that I kept hearing from everybody I spoke to. The first one was, call it mind over matter. So consistently, particularly from the experts, the PMS experts, they were talking about suicidal ideation. So a very, very extreme, upset, unhappy, desperate mood experience. The kind of severity of which you wouldn't be able to work, you wouldn't really be able to function, like very strong mood changes. And we were just talking about PMS. I wasn't talking about the cyclic exacerbation of depression or anxiety. Or there's another condition called PMDD, premenstrual dysphoric disorder, which is specifically about that when you're experiencing regularly on a cyclic basis those very strong emotional changes. We weren't talking about that. I was trying to just talk about the more normal, more common changes. So it was interesting that when I asked these experts about healthy premenstrual changes, I was getting very strong emotional symptoms. But also, in some of what they were saying, they were almost implying that the pain that we might feel in the womb is related to a psychological cause. So almost the other way around, that if you're very upset, that could cause the pain. And this is from people who really, they're medical, they've been trained. They should understand why we are experiencing pain during our periods, and that it's not psychological, it's a physical, healthy process. So this was very interesting to me to hear this. And interestingly, when I spoke to the patients, they didn't do this. They spoke about pain mainly, some emotional changes such as irritability, low mood sometimes before or during their period or just after their period. But they were really talking about these physical things: swollen boobs, sore breasts, headaches, mainly pain. So this was a real difference. So I knew that the discourse was coming from medicine, not from ordinary discussions about PMS. The next one's a bit tricky. I call it Snatch 22, which refers to a catch 22 situation, which is no matter what you do, you can't win. And it refers to that at the moment, people link those healthy cyclic changes with the severe symptoms, which are typically underlying conditions. And they think they're the same thing, that they're linked on a normal curve or a spectrum, so that they have the same origin. It's just one is worse than the other. This isn't true. So we have healthy menstrual changes, of which most of us experience. And then you have underlying conditions that have their own causes. They might just be triggered or worsened by these healthy changes. So they're actually separate things. But by doing that, this is why sometimes if you experience really bad pain, severe emotional change, you might be told it's normal. This is a normal cyclic change. Just get over it. Everybody goes through this. And you'll be dismissed or be normalized. And at the same time, everybody who reproduces, everybody with a menstrual cycle, is told that they're somehow ill or that we're less than or less capable than simply because we have a menstrual cycle, because in effect it's a less severe form of these health conditions. So neither of these are physiologically correct, but it creates this connection between different things which shouldn't really be there. And it means none of us can win, whether we're healthy or we're unhealthy. We're put into this strange position. And then the third one I called the curse. So we know, so in Christianity we have Adam and Eve is cursed because she chose knowledge when she was told not to. But the idea that periods might be a kind of punishment for women. I'm not sure what we're supposed to have done other than eat an apple within Christianity, but the idea that there's just something inherently wrong, ill, pathological, maybe even sometimes evil or negative. You know, there are some darker myths about the female body too. You know, witchcraft was a big thing in Europe, and it ends in lots of murders. I'm afraid these sorts of ideas about something about our bodies that makes us lesser for sure, but also just wrong or ill as well. And I heard this a lot when people just blamed the female sex hormones, so they blame estrogen or progesterone for their experiences, and there's no proof of that. We have this stereotype of the PMS person, and it's exactly the same as the hysterical female. So sort of crazy, wide eyes, either angry or screaming or crying, and heat sort of coming from her head, sort of crazy woman. This is a gender myth. Again, this is just designed to devalue the opinions and words of women. But this came a lot to a lot of people's descriptions of PMS. And we also see it in medicine when people say, oh, the only cure for instance, your emotional distress will be a total hysterectomy. The idea that you can cure somebody's emotional distress by removing their reproductive organs. Interestingly, this is never discussed when it's a man experiencing extreme emotional distress or suicidal ideation. The idea that they should be castrated to solve all their problems isn't one that typically comes up, but we've had it for hundreds of years regarding women's cycles. Now, I'm not saying that the cycles can't trigger or worsen emotional stress. They can, because we're experiencing this inflammation, it can make things worse. But the idea that you'll be cured by hysterectomy is not necessarily true. If you haven't dealt with the thing that's making you emotionally upset, be it something from childhood or more recently, or an underlying condition, then it's unlikely that having a very invasive surgical operation, which has its own dangers, should be called a cure. You know, this is again a not a scientific way of describing the situation. And then finally, black box. So a black box is used in scientific descriptions to describe anything where you don't really know what's happening inside. The idea that you have this kind of metal electronic box or whatever, something goes in, something comes out, but we don't know what happens inside. And I really think this is a good analogy for the female reproductive body, because for hundreds of years it hasn't been adequately taught to anyone, but particularly to medics. And so we get these kind of ideas that there's something mysterious or unknowable about our bodies. For instance, even though no direct link has ever been established between either estrogen or progestin and any cyclic symptom at all, we keep just doing more and more research to find out, so that they don't find a result. They say we need more research to try and find a result. It goes round and around in a circle because they haven't thought about what else is happening in the body apart from the hormonal changes. So this relates to that first part of the talk, where if you're not taught anything beyond the hormonal changes, then it limits your thinking and your ability to look beyond what else is happening in the body. So I think it was pretty obvious in my research on PMS that the scientific practice around female cyclic health has been very bad science. It's been based on assumptions and limited knowledge, particularly knowledge of hormones versus other things like inflammation happening in the body. So this obviously affects the way that patients are dealt with. So this idea that your symptoms are normalized, particularly pain-related ones, or sometimes taken more seriously, emotional distress, but that's blamed on your body instead of emotionally distressing experiences that you might have had. And so you might be dismissed by your doctor, or you might be given antidepressants, for example, when in fact there's something else going on, or you might not be referred for further treatment for something like fibroids or anemia, you name it, whatever is actually causing your problem. And by doing this over and over again, we are actually, particularly medical people, are unintentionally reproducing certain gender and racial myths. So I talk about racial myths particularly in regard to pain. So again, in the UK and in the US in particular, we know that people who've been racialized, so that's usually black or brown skinned individuals living in those countries, are even more likely to be dismissed when they go to their doctor and complain of pain or any other symptom. And that's because there's this gender myth that female reproductive pain is normal and we should just magically deal with it without any treatment. But also the idea that, so in the US, that was slaves, that there was a justification by white people in the past, the idea that black and brown bodies could somehow withstand greater pain, that this was completely fine for certain people to do these painful jobs or be in these painful positions because they just magically could withstand it. Even ideas about having thicker skin, not needing anesthetic, all these sorts of dangerous racial myths. And these myths build on each other to the point where we know that in the UK, black and brown women, when they go to see the doctor, they're even more likely to not be listened to and not be treated properly. But also white women, to a lesser extent. So yeah, there are lots of implications of this research. We might, all of us have been experienced when we've been in pain or we've expressed distress and we haven't been believed. We've been told it's all in our head, that we're kind of doing it to ourselves, or that it's normal. This can lead to poor health outcomes if we don't seek or we don't receive medical care for underlying conditions. I think some of us are a bit afraid of our reproductive bodies. We might be afraid of our menstrual fluid, afraid of talking to a doctor about it, because we don't know enough about it, so it becomes a scary and a mysterious thing. I think lots of people don't really think through the implications of perhaps pregnancy, childbirth, or relating to their health, because we're kept in ignorance. We're not taught how certain health conditions can be much worse during those times. There's obviously also political implications. If even doctors sort of taught only one side of the menstrual cycle, we'll just keep being dismissed when we describe extreme pain. People will keep saying your emotional distress is to do with your body and not to do with these experiences that you're going through. We'll keep going through this idea that we're just inherently weaker, we're injured in some way by a menstrual cycle, that we're weaker. And the big one, which we're seeing a lot more of recently with sort of far right ideologies, is that women shouldn't be educated, they shouldn't go to paid work, they certainly shouldn't have equal pay or leadership positions, because we should be just having babies and caring for children for free. Okay, this is a political thing. This is not a biological or natural state of events. And then within clinical training, I've seen this with PMS. We've had over 100 years of this very bad scientific practice where they keep looking for a hormonal cause where there is none, and they don't look at other likely factors in cyclical ill health. We still sort of reproduce these ideas of people exaggerating symptoms or taking emotional symptoms more seriously than we take pain, and it's a waste of money. And I'll just finish talking now. Sorry to go on for so long, but at the moment with this code, which is the CNF50 code, if you would like a copy of the book, you can get 50% off. So I'll just leave this on. I think it's also in the chat, which might be easier to copy and paste. But if you are interested in buying the book, you can get half price with that code. And that's me finished.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sally. It's very exciting. Even I keep reading your books. We have interaction in between virtually with text messages. Even though this is very, very few things is very new for me, and I believe it is very tough to get published and very tough to get the audience who really like this idea, because the entire menstrual discussions movement going in this way, and then you are you are in that, I would say, the other way around. So this is despite all challenges, this is very, very unique, and I really very proud of you, because you are paving the way of dignified menstruation. We don't have much time to discuss, only 10 minutes. I wanted to get more clarity on your presentation. Earlier in your presentation, you mentioned that we need a menstruation to prevent us from the danger. Can you elaborate it? Why it is important to protect from us? What kind of danger we have? How it is preventing us? Can you elaborate a little bit more?
Yeah. So even a healthy pregnancy can bring dangers to the parent, because when you have a baby in your womb, its job is to get as many nutrients from you as possible so that it can survive. And your job is to try and limit them so that you're still healthy and able to survive the pregnancy. So there is a slight, some people call it a battle, but it's not that. It's more just competition over resources. And these are the resources that we get from eating and flowing in our blood and our body, but also our immune system. So our immune system has to adapt to allow a baby, because babies could be a different sex, they have different genetics to us, they have different bacterial things, and ordinarily our body is designed to get rid of anything and everything that could be a virus or an infection or something like that. So already pregnancy is quite a complex system of to and fro. Like, we have to balance the needs of the embryo with that of the parent. But actually in humans, we have this high rate of embryos that aren't good enough. They're not going to last for lots of different reasons. Maybe the genetics are slightly wrong. Maybe there's something physically wrong with the embryo, or there's something wrong with the placenta as it attaches to the womb. It could be too deep. It might not be deep enough. There's lots and lots of different things. Or for instance, even something that happens to you, you're in a car crash or something like that, it can be safer for you and your body, for your survival, to lose the life of the embryo. We know this. We see that there's a lot of miscarriages, and a lot of pregnancies don't go to full term, and that's the body trying to protect us from the what's essentially the embryo is trying to take more than perhaps we're able to give, for whatever reason. There are lots of reasons, but there are lots of different possible things. But then there are also health conditions. So when you're pregnant, we're more likely to get diabetes, a type of diabetes during pregnancy. We're more likely to get very high blood pressure, which puts pressure on your heart. And that's the most common reason why people might die before or giving birth, is this hypertension. It's one of the most common reasons. If we're low in iron and we give birth, so if you're anemic and you give birth, you're much more likely to have a hemorrhage and to die from the loss of blood. So yeah, there are lots of dangers, and so evolution doesn't really care about us, and it doesn't really care about our babies, but it does care about survival of our genes. And so it must have been that people that were having these periods, as we'd call them now, or early abortions, like or this decidulization happening before there was any embryo in the womb, that more of us survived in order to both have children and survive long enough to look after those children so that they could grow up. And even though we've evolved periods, obviously we know, and there's lots of people on this call from countries where people still die, lots and lots of people die in pregnancy and childbirth. It's still a very dangerous experience. But what we're talking about is modes of selection. So the people who survived and had children that survived were those that selective, more viable pregnancies that were going to make the 9 months and then childbirth, and that the parent was also hopefully going to survive. So yeah, that's what I mean by the dangers of pregnancy and childbirth.
Okay,
I'm not
thank you.
against
Thank you. It's very
pregnancy.
clear
Yeah.
now. And another last question. Particularly in the global north, there are so many books coming up right now around menstruation. And then, why did you write this book? What is your motivation to write this book? Could you explain in very, very short?
Yeah, well, I think I find my work is a bit different because I integrate biology and physiology and science with that critical feminist overview. For 50 years, they've been very separate. So you have the medics saying one thing and the feminists saying another thing, and there's a lot of miscommunication or even no communication between the two. And I thought that was really annoying because I read all the books, the medical ones and the feminist ones, and to me they make sense. They're just really different. They're talking about different things, different aspects. So it was a way to try and integrate that feminist work on PMS and the biomedical work on PMS, and also my own understanding of physiology, which I knew before I started my research that there's something wrong, because I already knew, for instance, that whenever I started a conversation about physiology and what was happening in the body, people only talked to me about hormones, and they only really talked to me about emotional change. It was as if pain and the inflammation happening in the body were just, nobody knew about them. And it turns out, yeah, we're not taught about them. So yeah, nobody did know about them.
Okay, thank you. There is a one question. Let's take that question very quickly. She's Anisha from Nepal. The female reproductive system has always been deemed mysterious and is understudied. You just talked about the essence of debunking the hormonal explanation of menstrual symptoms. What has been the most significant pushback or challenge to this perspective? Thank you, Anisha.
Yeah, the biggest challenge has been getting to people to change, medics, so really it's clinicians, to change what they've been doing. So they don't disagree with my work, they accept it, they understand it. But medics have been trained to do what they're told. The type of people who become doctors have done very well at school, they do very well at medical school, and they're doing well because they retain a lot of information and facts about the body, what they're taught, and it works very well, for instance, to know if someone's having a heart attack or they might have cancer, things like that. But they're not taught to think critically, and they're not taught to question what they've been taught. It's accepted that what they've been taught are facts. Now, what I'm saying is you're only being taught part of the information. You're not being taught everything, and that this is political. Because, for instance, if you do ever meet someone who works in research on infertility, they know this stuff. They know all about periods, and that periods are basically a mini abortion. Because when someone has a period in infertility work, it's a failed pregnancy, and they hate them. They think, oh, this is a problem. Period. We don't have a conception. So it's the hardest thing is getting those who have power, which to my mind are people who are in charge of colleges of gynecology, those sort of people, to do something, to change what they do, to change the textbooks, to change medical education, or certainly even to believe me, because of course I'm a woman and I'm not a medic. And even though I think they agree with what I'm saying, they don't value me in who I am or my training to be more correct than their teachers. So yeah, it's a lot of politics. So I tend to try and talk to the public more, so that eventually doctors are forced to improve their education.
Yeah, thank you so much. I totally agree with you. there is a politics, there is a gender myth, there is a biology, and sometimes it is a kind of combo, and sometimes misinterpretation, sometimes mislead the menstrual movement. We have to work a lot and have to go a long way. We don't have a time. It is already 1 hour. Thank you very much, Dr. Sally. It's a great honor to have you, and you are a great big and close ally for Global South Coalition for Dignified Menstruation. We need to have another chat for this discussion. And thank you everyone who are joining here through the online and then Facebook page. Please get updated through the social media and website. We have already announced for the learning conference, which is happening in the upcoming 7th International Dignified Mission Day in Nepal. There are so many opportunities, and I really like to see Dr. Sally here. Let's have a one workshop. And with this note, I end this conversation. Those who are registered, we will share the presentation, and also this talk will be uploaded in our YouTube channel, which is Dignified Menstruation. Thank you, everyone. See you in next webinar.
Thank you, Radha.
Thank you. Thank you.